This is the pericardium enclosing the heart. Its base is below where it fuses with the central tendon of diaphragm, and its apex is above where it fuses with the vessels entering or leaving the heart. The position of its apex and base are the reverse of those of the heart, where the apex of the heart is below and its base is above. This is the pericardial cavity. Inside this cavity, there are two sinuses called the transverse and oblique sinuses of the pericardium. To demonstrate the transverse sinus of pericardium, put your finger from the right side in front of the superior vena cava and behind the ascending aorta and pulmonary trunk. The finger will appear on the left side. Behind the finger, there are the superior vena cava and both atria, which form the base of the heart. In front of the finger are the ascending aorta and pulmonary trunk. To expose the oblique sinus, just lift the apex of the heart, put your finger up behind the left atrium. This is the oblique sinus. With the finger in the sinus, the left atrium is in front of it, while the pericardium behind the finger, which separates it from the esophagus and descending aorta. This is the sternocostal or anterior surface of the heart. The base is formed by two atria, the right border by the right atrium, the inferior border by both ventricles. The right ventricle forms its right 2/3, and the left ventricle forms its left 1/3, including the apex. The left border by the left ventricle and auricle of the left atrium. The surface is divided by anterior interventricular groove, which is demarcated by a fatty line into right ventricle and left ventricle. The line is opposite the anterior border of the interventricular septum, and it watches the anterior interventricular branch of left coronary artery and the great cardiac vein. The uppermost part of the right ventricle is called infundibulum or conus arteriosus. It leads to the pulmonary trunk. This is the auricle of right atrium, projecting on the right side of the pulmonary trunk. This is the auricle of left atrium, projecting on the left side of the pulmonary trunk. The pulmonary trunk is anterior to the ascending aorta, close to the heart, but higher up it comes to its left side. At its end, it is behind where it divides into two pulmonary arteries below the arch of aorta. The right pulmonary artery runs to the right behind the ascending aorta, while the left pulmonary artery runs to the left below the arch of the aorta and in front of the descending aorta. This is the inferior surface of the heart. formed by the left ventricle in its left 2/3 and the right ventricle in its right 1/3. So most of the inferior surface is formed by the left ventricle, while the sternocostal surface is the reverse, formed mainly by the right ventricle. The two ventricles are separated from one another by the posterior interventricular groove, which lodges the posterior interventricular branch of the right coronary artery and the middle cardiac vein. This is the sternocostal surface of the heart, which is directed forwards. It is identified by the fact that the pulmonary trunk lies in front of the descending aorta, and that the two auricles project forwards, one on each side of the pulmonary trunk. To put the heart in the anatomical position, try to identify first the sternocostal surface, which is the anterior surface. Then the apex of the heart should be below and to the left, while the base is directed upwards. The base is identified by the pulmonary trunk and ascending aorta, as well as by the two atria. Now, you can identify the borders of the heart. This is the right border. This is the lower border. This is the left border. And this is the upper border. On the sternocostal surface, notice the two main grooves which start one on each side of the pulmonary trunk. The anterior interventricular groove starts on the left side of the pulmonary trunk, between it and the left auricle, and descends towards the apex of the heart to end a short distance to the right side of the apex. The groove lodges the anterior interventricular branch of the left coronary artery and the great cardiac vein. The great cardiac vein ascends in the groove and turns to the left in the atrioventricular groove, which separates the two atria from the two ventricles. Ultimately, it will end in the coronary sinus, which is a wide venous channel. This is the left part of the atrioventricular groove, as it curves onto the back of the heart, between the left atrium and the two ventricles. This is the back of the left atrium. And these are the left and the right ventricles. And this is the coronary sinus lying horizontally in the atrioventricular groove. It opens into the right atrium. Back again to the sternocostal surface. This is the right part of the atrioventricular groove, starting on the right of the pulmonary trunk, between it and the auricle of the right atrium. It passes between the right ventricle and the right atrium to continue on the back of the heart. It crosses the right coronary artery. This is the right coronary artery. It gives off the marginal artery at the lower border of the heart to run to the left along this border. On the back of the heart, the right coronary artery, posterior interventricular artery, which runs towards the apex of the heart in company with the middle cardiac vein. This is the middle cardiac vein. It also ends in the coronary sinus as the great cardiac vein. Both coronary arteries arise from the beginning of the ascending aorta. The right coronary artery arises from the anterior aortic sinus just behind the pulmonary trunk. It runs between the pulmonary trunk and the auricle of the right atrium. The left coronary artery, however, arises from the left posterior aortic sinus, that's to say, from the back of the beginning of the ascending aorta. It runs to the left between the pulmonary trunk and auricle of left atrium. Then it curves to the left in the atrioventricular groove. Where it gives off its anterior interventricular artery. Then continues to the left where it is called the circumflex artery. This is the back of the heart. This is the back of the left atrium. Notice the four pulmonary veins that open into the back of the left atrium. Two on each side. This is a superior pulmonary vein, and this is an inferior pulmonary vein from the left lung, the same from the right lung. This is the right pulmonary artery passing horizontally behind the ascending aorta and superior vena cava, just above the left atrium. So, the left atrium is situated between the right pulmonary artery above and the coronary sinus below. This is the right side of the heart. This is the right atrium, with the right auricle projecting from it. At the root of the auricle, there is a shallow vertical sulcus called sulcus terminalis, which extends from the opening of the superior vena cava above to the opening of the inferior vena cava below. It corresponds to the crista terminalis inside the right atrium. This is the left border of the heart. Notice the left ventricle and auricle of the left atrium above it. This is the projecting aortic arch forming what is called the aortic knuckle. This is the orifice of the superior vena cava, and this is the orifice of the inferior vena cava. This is the valve of the inferior vena cava, separating it from the opening of the coronary sinus. This is the orifice of the coronary sinus, just to the left of the inferior vena cava. This is the right atrioventricular orifice, just to the left of the orifice of the coronary sinus. The orifice of the coronary sinus lies between the orifice of the inferior vena cava and the right atrioventricular orifice. Notice that the right atrioventricular orifice admits the tips of 3 fingers. Notice that the posterior part of the cavity is smooth and is called sinus venerum. It is derived from the sinus venosus of the fetus. The anterior part of the cavity is rough and is derived from the fetal right atrium. The rough part is due to the musculi pectinati. The musculi pectinati are separated from the smooth part by the crista terminalis. This is the interatrial septum. Showing the fossa ovalis, which is an oval depression. It is surrounded by an arched margin called annulus ovalis. This is the cavity of the right ventricle. This is the cavity of the right ventricle. Notice the smooth upper part which forms the infundibulum. It leads to the pulmonary orifice, which is guarded by 3 semilunar cusps, which are convex towards the ventricle and concave towards the pulmonary trunk. Its lower part is rough by the trabeculae carni and the papillary muscles. These are the ridges of the trabeculae carni. This is the anterior papillary muscle attached to the anterior wall. Notice the septomarginal trabecular or moderator band as it runs from the septum to the base of the anterior papillary muscle. This moderator band lodges the right branch of the atrioventricular bundle. This is the inferior papillary muscle attached to the inferior wall. This is the septal papillary muscles attached to the interventricular septum. These papillary muscles are attached to the cusps of the atrioventricular orifice. by cordy tendini. These are the cusps of the right atrioventricular orifice. There are three cusps This is the cavity of the left ventricle. Its upper part is fibrous and is called the aortic vestibule. Notice that the interventricular septum is bulging towards the right ventricle. It lies obliquely so that the right ventricle lies in front and to the right of the left ventricle. The lower part of the cavity of the left ventricle shows the trabecular carni and two papillary muscles. This is the anterior papillary muscle attached to the anterior wall. This is the inferior papillary muscle attached to the inferior wall. Notice the cordi tendini attached to the two cusps of the mitral valve. The left atrioventricular orifice is guarded by two cusps only and admits the tip of two fingers. This valve is called the mitral valve. This is the aortic orifice, which is guarded by three semilunar cusps. Compare the thick wall of the left ventricle with the thin wall of the right ventricle. This is the cavity of the left atrium. It is smooth and receives the four pulmonary veins. Its auricle is rough because of the musculi pectinata. This is the left atrioventricular orifice. It admits two fingers and is called the mitral valve. Here is the posterior mediastinum after removal of the heart. This is the thoracic duct, which lies behind the esophagus. Between the descending aorta and the azygos vein. It ascends in the posterior mediastinum to enter the superior mediastinum, where it lies on the left side of the esophagus. The thoracic duct begins in the abdomen from the cisterna chyli and enters the thorax through the aortic opening of the diaphragm. This is the esophagus, running downwards and to the left. This is the thoracic aorta. This is the azygos vein. This is the termination of the hemiazygos vein, as it crosses the midline to end in the azygos vein. This is the trachea. which lies completely in the superior mediastinum. It is in front of the esophagus. This is the left recurrent laryngeal nerve. Between the trachea and the esophagus.